So let's read Hebrews 4, verses 14 through 16. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weakness, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are. Yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. So, I don't know if you guys know this, but I work for my family's business. So I'm mostly a propane technician. So, I go to people's houses if they're having problems, or I'll install a propane tank so they can use the gas. And sometimes I go to these houses and the customers are just difficult. Some are like really passive aggressive. I'll be like, make sure you do blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't care that much. And then some of them are just straight up like angry and rude. But most of them are nice. I don't want to give a bad demographic. Most of the customers are very nice. And we also have an office. And so there's people who sit in a building and they take the calls, they listen to the customers, they put in the requests. And people over the phone are a little bit different. It's one thing if you're face-to-face with someone, usually they're not going to be that rude. But over the phone, I don't know what it is, people just get nasty. And this is what my office has to deal with all the time. And they're the ones who actually handle whose house I go to and what I'm going to do there. So it's kind of nice to have that barrier between me and the customers. So if they have a problem with me, they have to go through the office. So my office mediates. That word means they go between. That's going to be a key word tonight, mediate. They go in between me and the customers. And there's lots of times where I can't really relate to the issue my customer is having just because I think they're not very smart. And there's lots of times they don't get what I'm going through because whatever reason. But the office gets both parties. They understand what I'm going through. They understand what the customer's frustration is, and they provide a solution. And we're going to look a little bit more into that. But we're going to jump right back into it. Which book are we in? What chapter? What verses? Good job, guys. All right, so we'll read verse 14 again. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. So do you guys know what a priest is, like in the Old Testament? Damon? Right, it was that person who mediated between God and his people. And Brett gave a great teaching. It's called the God-Man. And he gives this example. So you got priests and you got prophets. So let's pretend, the cross, that just represents God. A prophet, do you guys remember what a prophet was?
A person who got what God was telling him and spread it throughout the land.
Right, it's pretty much just God's messenger. So if I'm a prophet, I'm taking God's message, and I'm facing the people, and I'm delivering it to the people. Now, if I was a priest, I'm facing the other way. I'm talking from the people to God. So you got that? If I'm a priest, I'm taking the people and sending them to God. It's a big difference. And in the New Testament, so that's the Old Testament piece. For the New Testament, Jesus becomes our priest. He becomes the person that takes it from the people to God. And he is still the one today that does that. He does it for us to God. We'll move on to verse 14, or verse 15. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. This is kind of where we get into the meat of this passage. So this is talking about our weaknesses. And as humans, we have this weakness because of our sinful nature. God does not have this weakness. He's not sinful. He doesn't have this weakness. So how can Jesus relate to our weakness if he's fully God? And that is because he has been tempted just as we're tempted because he is a human. So we know God cannot be tempted. So does this mean that Jesus can be tempted? That means he's man, but that means he can't be God because God can't be tempted. But, hold on, we have a Bible's worth of proof that Jesus is in fact a God. We can see his miracles. We can see what he taught about and the way he taught about it. In Matthew chapter 3, verse 16, 17, it says, as soon as Jesus was baptized, so we're seeing Jesus getting baptized here, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting him. And a voice from heaven said, this is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. God's making it pretty clear here just who Jesus is. You remember the Trinity, 3 in 1. Right? So Jesus is the Son, along with the Father and the Spirit. They're all one God. So surely he must be God. And he was also born of a virgin, a human woman. So we can clearly and confidently say that Jesus is both fully man and fully God at the same time. And here's kind of the kicker that gets it all going. It's verse 16. It says, let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. So why is this important, and why does it matter that Jesus is both fully God and fully man? Who cares? And it's because he has to be in order to be our mediator. So remember back to how my office mediates for me and my customers. They go in between, just how the priest mediates for God and his people. But why do they have to do this? Why do we have to have a mediator? Why can't we just go up to God ourselves and take the business to him? I mean, if we're here and God's there, why do we need a person here to take us to him? Let's just go up to him. It's a rhetorical question. But it is because God is holy and he is righteous. And we are sinners. They don't mix. It's like oil and water. They don't mix. So if we come to God without a mediator, what happens? Right, there's wrath, there's judgment, there's destruction. God cannot tolerate it. He is just. So God takes us for who we are. And if you take an honest look into yourself, or at least I know if I look into myself, I see filth, I see wickedness, I see rebellion. I see that I am worthy of condemnation even on my best days. Even then, I still fall so short. And in the Old Testament, their solution to this was by sacrificing animals. So, the punishment of sin is death. So to avoid that wrath, they put it on animals. So those animals are essentially just taking their sin away. And it temporarily gets rid of these sins, but they were never enough. It was never enough. They always had to come back to sacrificing these animals day after day, year after year. The priests had to sacrifice these animals for the people because they could not go to God because they could not wash their sins away. And these animals' sacrifices, they were just a shadow, an example of what was to come, a sacrifice to come. A sacrifice that would once be given and it would never have to be redone. And this sacrifice, of course, is Jesus Christ when he died on the cross and was resurrected. And once the sacrifice is complete, he goes and sits on his throne and he says, it is finished. It's done. He has conquered death. He has conquered sin. And now Jesus alone is our mediator. He can go between man and God because he is both related to man, being tempted and living a human life, while also being God and not sinning. So just like the office where I work gets both parties and they go in between, Jesus fully and completely understands both man and God. Just like the priests in the Old Testament, where they took the people's sins, put it into animals so they could talk to God. But the difference is the priests back then, they all died. They're not around no more. But Jesus, we know, lives forever, which is why still to this day, he can be our mediator. So when he goes between us and God with his sacrifice, he has the power or the ability to allow us to join with him and make us clean. He has the ability to make us holy, to make us righteous, so we can withstand God's presence. And what a wonderful presence that is. And of course, this will be fully realized when we die and go up to heaven to be with him. But it's still prevalent while we're living on the earth today. But this does take faith. It takes faith. Do you guys remember Abnell taught a little bit a while ago? He told guilt, grace, and gratitude. You guys remember that? You guys were here for that? But we look into and see the sinfulness in ourselves, and Jesus wipes it clean despite all of our blemishes. And this should create a response in us. When you realize what Jesus has really done for you, when you realize you can't go to God because you would just be wiped away, when you realize that Jesus gave his life so that he could go in between us and God, it leads to gratitude and worship. So remember, the whole point, Jesus must be fully man and fully God so that he can go between us and God, because he is the great high priest. And through this sacrifice, he can allow us to one day be with God ourselves. And that is what we put our faith in when we believe in Jesus. So, dear Lord, I pray that you would just help this passage marinate with us. I pray that you would unlock its meaning in our hearts and in our minds. I pray that as we go into these discussions to talk a little more about it, clear up any understanding we might have, I pray that your Spirit would just be there guiding us the entire way. So I pray you just be with us the rest of the night, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.